did not get a popsicle, they're up here in the front, in the cooler. You got one, didn't you? Yeah. Everybody stayed hydrated today?
Oh yeah.
Please do. It's dangerous.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, another minute or so, waiting for some people to come up. All right, why don't we go ahead and get started. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Andrew. I'm the Safety and Loss Prevention Manager for Goodwill here on Ottawa, Sandusky County. So any safety questions you have after the presentation, if you have an issue or you see somewhere where we can improve on safety, please come up and talk to me. Other than that, how many people here know somebody who has suffered from addiction or has lost a loved one to addiction? It can be anything, alcohol, opioids. By now, everybody probably knows that we have a bit of a crisis going on in this part of the country, especially with opioids. It's affected people all walks of life, all socioeconomical backgrounds, and nobody is really immune to it. It can happen to anybody. So today we have two special presenters. We have Tom and Lavin Schwan. Lavin works with Firelands Regional Medical Center.
Bellevue Hospital.
I'm sorry, at the Bellevue Hospital. I apologize for that.
Plug into the Bellevue Hospital.
Always got to get those plugs in. And they're here today to present Joey's story, which is the story of Lavin's son. And I don't want to say too much else, so without further ado, Lavin.
Thank you, Andrew, and I want to thank the Goodwill organization for allowing us to come in and present. And I really want to thank you for this fan right here. Whoever did that, thank you. As Andrew said, my name's Lavin. This is my husband, Tom. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay, cool. We are here to share Joey's story. Joey is my son, Tom's stepson. That is him there on the screen. And he was born April 7th, 1991. He died November 12th, 2016 of a heroin fentanyl overdose. So we are here to share his story. Before we get too far into his story, I really want to talk a little bit about mine, because in Joey's situation, there is a direct correlation between the two. That's not always the case, but in Joey's situation, it was. I was born into a family where both of my parents were alcoholics. I have three younger brothers. All three of my brothers at some point in their lives were addicted to something, to some substance. Now I'm happy to report that all three of my brothers are now sober and in recovery and doing phenomenally well. But it took rehab, it took hospitalization, it took a lot of difficult times and challenging times before they were able to reach sobriety. My dad, on the other hand, he committed suicide. And that is how he escaped his disease of addiction and his addiction to alcohol. So Joey was born into a family with a strong genetic link for addiction, but that does not mean that that is always the case. By far it is not. When he was 13, I discovered that he was smoking cigarettes. Now, as his mom and him being 13, I was devastated by that. I just could not understand why he would want to smoke cigarettes. He was a student at Old Fort High School. He was a great student. Academically, he was great. Athletically, he played basketball, soccer, track, golf. Had Old Fort had a football team, he would have been right there playing football. So he was very good academically and athletically, and I just could not understand. So there were consequences imposed for his action of smoking cigarettes. I went and talked with his basketball coach because he loved his basketball coach. And I thought, well, maybe he could have some influence on him that I cannot. I also sat him down as a 13-year-old and I talked to him about the disease of addiction and how he was born into a family that he was predisposed to. He told me two things about smoking cigarettes. He could stop anytime, and he enjoyed what the nicotine did. It relaxed him. He graduated from Old Fort in 2009. He went on to Bowling Green State University. He wanted to get a degree in business. He was there probably 6 months. I received a phone call from him. It's about 2 o'clock in the morning. He was in jail. He and a few of his buddies were driving around campus of BG in Joey's vehicle. Joey's driving. They got pulled over by the campus police, and they found drug paraphernalia in the console of the car. It was Joey's car. Joey's driving. Joey gets arrested. So he's calling me to tell me what had happened, and he asked me if I would come bail him out. I said no, I wasn't going to do that. My thought was, you know what, you can spend the night in jail and hopefully discover that that's really not where you want to be. His girlfriend bailed him out the next day. He had a court date. I went with him to that court date. He was put on probation. This was his first offense. They put him on probation. But part of his probation was he had to submit to random drug tests. So basically what that meant is everything was automated through the Bowling Green Municipal Court. He would call this number. He was assigned a color. If they announced his color, he had a very short window of time that he had to present to the Bowling Green Municipal Court for a P-test, for a drug test. They eventually called his color. He went in for that P-test. That P-test came back positive for Adderall. What I discovered at that point in time is that Adderall is a prescription medication that is prescribed by physicians for all the right reasons, but it also can be abused in college environments because it is a speed. So it allows some college students to pull all-nighters, party all night, study all night, whatever it is that they choose to do. So there was obviously somewhat of a pattern developing, but honestly, I just assumed he was going to outgrow it. I knew he was partying in college. I knew he was drinking alcohol. I knew he was smoking pot, but so were all of his buddies. So I honestly just assumed he would outgrow it. When he was 19, he had to have his wisdom teeth pulled out. I went with him for that appointment. He's laying in the recovery room. He's got gauze in his mouth. He can't really talk real well yet. He's like, "Mom, what are they going to give me for pain?" I'm like, "You know what, buddy? I don't know. We'll find out when we check out." They ended up giving him a 30-day prescription for Percocet. He went back to BG. He was living with about 4 or 5 guys that he had never met before BG, but they were all becoming very close, tight friends. One of them in particular, his name was Zach. Zach's mom and dad own a roofing company here in Fremont. Zach decided that he was going to leave BG and go back to Fremont and work with his mom and dad in the roofing company. And he wanted Joey to go with him. Joey told me what his plans were. Now, Joe was paying for his own college education, but I also told him that I really wanted to see him further his education and stay at BG. But honestly, I just wanted him to be happy. He left BG. He moved in with Zach at an apartment here in Fremont and started working for the roofing company. Yeah. He's a great guy. Zach Thurn is his name. So anyways, he gets an apartment with Zach, and they start living together. He starts working in the roofing company, and honestly, everything we thought was going along fine. We lived in Bellevue, he's here in Fremont, but we had birthdays, barbecues, that type of thing. He was very engaged with family activities. If we weren't together, we were FaceTiming, calling, texting, that kind of thing. So we were always in communication with him. And again, everything seemed fine. It was during this time that his sister Jenna got married. Jenna works at the Bellevue Hospital with me. She also lives in Bellevue. But again, everything seemed to be going along fine. I told you about my 3 brothers. All of them live up in Michigan. 2 of them own a home improvement business. One day, and their business was going gangbusters, just crazy busy. They knew Joe was doing roofing. They knew he was a hard worker. So one of my brothers called him and said, "Hey, if we get you situated up in Michigan, get you an apartment, get you, situated, will you come work in the home improvement business with us?" Now, I was really excited about that because, one, he'd be around my brothers, And 2, he would learn an additional trade. He would learn home improvement in addition to the roofing. So I was really excited. So we moved, he said yes, he wanted to do that. So we moved him up to Michigan. They got him in an apartment and he started working in home improvement. About 8 months after being there, I received a phone call from one of my brothers that Joe was caught snorting something in a work truck at a work site, and my brother was firing him. Now, I totally understood my brother's position, and I totally supported my brother in that, but honestly, I was devastated. My brother also said, you know what, Lavin, at the end of this workday, I want to sit down and I want to talk to Joey as his uncle. So after the workday, they sat down, they had that conversation. My brother, understanding the importance of second chances, chose to give Joey a second chance and did not fire him. Turns out he was snorting oxycodone. He continued in the home improvement business. In 2015, Jenna, his sister, my daughter, she had a baby girl, Ellie. When Ellie was born, and again, Jenna and her husband live in Bellevue. When Ellie was born, Joey made many trips back down here to Ohio to just be with her and spend time with Jenna and Ellie. Then he started talking about wanting to come home. He really wanted a relationship with Ellie, and he wanted Ellie to know who her Uncle Joe was. So he started talking about wanting to come back home to Ohio. He told me that. I said, well, you're going to have to come up with a plan. He called Zach, and he called Zach's parents. He said, hey, if I come back to Ohio, will you rehire me? And they said, absolutely, yes, they would. Joey was always a hard worker. So he got situated with Zach and Zach's parents, moved back to Ohio, got an apartment again with Zach, actually moved back into the same apartment, and started working in the roofing company. So again, everything seemed to be going along fine at that point. In March of 2016, we opened a restaurant in Bellevue, Bone Boys Barbecue. About 3 months after opening the restaurant, Tom texted Joey and said, would you be willing to come work in the restaurant? Now, when we opened it, we knew we wanted family involved, and that was very important to Tom. So Tom one day texted Joey and said, would you come work in the restaurant? Now, Joey was also complaining that his back was bothering him, and with roofing, obviously, it's somewhat seasonal based on the weather. So, although Joey loved Zach and Zach's parents and what he was doing, he ultimately decided this is probably the best thing for me. So he came to work with us. Now, I was really excited about that because, again, although I work at the Bellevue Hospital, at the end of my work shift, I would change my clothes and put on my Bone Boys t-shirt, and I would go work in the restaurant and do whatever needed to be done. So that meant I was going to see Joe a lot. I would see him almost every day. So I was really excited about that. Shortly after Joe started working with us, he started coming in late. He would text Tom. Now, he did get an apartment in Bellevue. Once he knew he was going to be working in Bellevue, instead of driving back and forth, he got himself a little apartment. He would text Tom and say, I know I'm supposed to start at whatever time, but I had to run back to Fremont. I had to do a couple things. I'll be in. I'm just going to be late. A couple times he just didn't show up at all. Tom would text him and say, hey, what's up? You're supposed to be working. He said, oh, I didn't realize I was scheduled. Another thing that started happening almost immediately was he was always asking us for money. Now, he was getting a paycheck every Friday, like all of our other employees. He had his apartment, but he wasn't overwhelmed in debt. He didn't have a whole lot of bills, but he was constantly, hey, do you have $20? Do you have $10? Now, honestly, as a family, that was a red flag to us, and we started talking about, gosh, he's always asking for money. And we started talking about, okay, that's just not right. He's getting a paycheck every Friday. So that definitely was somewhat of an alarm for us. One day in the restaurant, one of our employees, her husband came in to have lunch. He had his lunch, he walked to the back of the restaurant to use the men's restroom. He opens the door of the restroom. There's a guy sitting on the floor in the restroom. Now, he wasn't in distress, but he shuts the door, he goes back out the restaurant, and he finds his wife. He said, there's a guy sitting on the floor in the bathroom. She goes to find Tom, Well, by this time, Joe had popped up from the floor and had gone back into the kitchen. So it was Joey. Tom got a hold of Joey and said, "Hey buddy, what's up? What were you doing sitting on the floor in the bathroom?" Joey told Tom that he was snorting cocaine. But he also said, "Please don't tell my mom. Please don't tell my mom." Tom, as Joey's stepdad, understood that that was a huge burden for him to carry. But he also thought, if I'm going to continue to have a relationship and build a relationship with Joey as his stepdad, then I'm going to honor this right now. And so he did not tell him. But he also told Joey, "I think you need to see a counselor." Now we know a good counselor in Bellevue. Tom got that information, gave it to Joey. Joey made an appointment. He went for one appointment, and then he made up excuses as to why he couldn't go for a second. So he obviously was not being compliant with that. Shortly after that incident in regards to the bathroom, another situation came up in the restaurant. 2 employees came to Tom one day and said, "We saw Joe rummaging through the tip drawer. When we first opened our restaurant, all of our employees make tips. When we first opened our restaurant, we had one long drawer. Every employee had a manila envelope. Their name was on the outside of the envelope. And when we would reconcile our cash for the day, we would put their tip money in there. So that way they could go and retrieve their tip money whenever they wanted." And Joey had one of those envelopes as well. So one day, 2 employees came to Tom and said, "We saw Joe. He was rummaging through the tip drawer." Tom got a hold of Joey, said, "Let's go outside. We need to talk." He said, "Hey, I've been told that you were rummaging through the tip envelopes." Initially, Joe denied it. Tom said, "Okay, we have security cameras in our restaurant for security purposes. I'll just take a look at the video." At which time Joe fessed up. Tom at this point in time said to Joe, "Okay, buddy, obviously this is something bigger than I realized. And there is absolutely no way that I cannot tell your mom. I have got to tell your mom about this." He also told Joey, "I think you need rehab." Tom came home that night. I did not work that night. It was about 10 o'clock. He said, "I want to share something with you." He told me about Joe going through the tip envelopes, and he showed me the video. Honestly, to watch that video, I just got sick, absolutely sick to my stomach. Tom said, "I think he needs rehab," and I said, "Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right, he needs rehab." That night, I did not sleep very good. The next morning, I called Joey. I said, "Hey buddy, I know what happened in the restaurant, and I really think that you need rehab." And he said, "You're right, I do." Honestly, at that point, there were a couple things going through my mind. One was, okay, that was a whole lot easier than I expected it was going to be. And 2, where is rehab? How do I get him in rehab? Who do I call? How do I make this happen? I had no idea. All I knew was that I needed to get my son in rehab. That day, I had to drive to Sandusky. I'm driving home on Route 2, and there's a billboard on the side of Route 2 that says, "Do you struggle with drug addiction? Call 1-800. I wrote that 1-800 number down as fast as I could. I went home, I called that number. I get this guy on the other end of the line. I told him who I was, I told him what I needed. He asked me some questions about me because Joe was on my insurance, and he asked me some questions about Joe that he thought I could answer. He said, "Give me about an hour and I'll call you back." I said, "Okay." He calls me back. He said, "Yes, we accept your insurance, and 2, we have a bed for your son. It's in California." I said, "Okay, I really need to call some family members. I need to talk to some people, so I'm going to hang up and I'm going to call you back. I will call you back after I get a chance to talk with some family." I said, "Okay." I hung up the phone. I called Tom. I called Jenna. And I called Joe's dad. I said, this is what I know. They do have a bed for him. It's in California, but I really, really want a family meeting. I want all of us to sit down. I want us all to hear this information at the same time, and hopefully we can all get on the same page. Everybody said, okay. I called Joey. I said, hey buddy, we're gonna have a meeting at our house tonight, Wednesday, and we need you to be there. We're gonna talk about going to rehab. He said, okay. This is a Wednesday. We all come over, so it's me, Tom, Jenna, his dad, Joey's dad, and Joey. We're all sitting in the living room. We put the same guy on speakerphone, and he starts sharing some of the same information that he shared with me. He was primarily now talking with Joe more than me, and he did ask Joe, he said, ask Joe, what is your DOC, drug of choice? Joe told him cocaine. He then proceeded to say, yes, it's in California, but we make all the flight arrangements. We make it very easy for you. And honestly, we could probably, if I hang up now, we could probably find a flight late tonight, Wednesday, or very early Thursday. At which time Joe said no. He said, I'm not going till Friday. He said, I have some loose ends to tie up. I'm not just picking up and leaving. I'm not going to go till Friday. So we as a family, we agreed, and quite honestly, for 24 to 36 hours, I held my breath and I prayed that he would not change his mind. When he left our house that night, I sent him a text message. I said, hey buddy, I know this is hard. I know it's a change, but I know you can do this. This is his text message back to me. Sounds good, Mama? I love you. I'm ready for this. This is what I need. I'm sorry I wasn't extremely enthusiastic tonight. I just get uncomfortable in those situations. I know that this is a good thing. It's just a big change, and I've never done anything like this. So although he was scared, he was uncertain, he was ready. He did not change his mind. He came to our house Friday morning. That was the flight out of Cleveland Friday morning. Comes to our house. When he came in our house, we handed him a journal. On the inside flap of the journal, I wrote to him, Joey, I am incredibly proud, happy, and hopeful with your willingness to take this step. I know it's scary. I know it's a change, but I also know that God loves you more than breath. And I love you just as much. Joey, you are funny, smart, kind, compassionate, but most importantly, you are my son. Let your barriers down, let your defenses down, and open yourself up to all that God has planned. I believe this is the first day to a life of joy, peace, contentment, and that makes me one happy mama. He called me mama all the time. I am, and I always will be your #1 fan. Use this journal to write down your joys, your thoughts, your feelings, your frustrations, your victories. Write down anything that comes to mind. And remember Proverbs 3, 5, and 6. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your path. And we gave him the journal and said, this is yours. We drove him to the Cleveland airport. I watched him walk through security as far as I could watch him. He turned and he blew me a kiss goodbye, and he got on a plane. The plan was he would have 7 to 10 days in detox. During the detox portion, you don't have any communication with family members. They take away your cell phone, any communicating, any social media. The very first day in detox was his very first journal writing, and this is what he wrote the very first day that he was in detox. Waking up this morning, I really realized this was real. I have been so high for so long and haven't focused or thought about anything since. Work has always been a blur, and I always wanted to leave. coming up with excuses to leave and go on break, to run home and shoot up or hit my pipe, thinking of different reasons to ask for money and constantly lying to get it. I cannot count the number of times that I have taken advantage of Dad, treating him like an ATM. Eventually, my habits will get me in serious trouble or push the people I care about so far away I won't be able to get them back. So this was his mindset the very first day in detox, and we had no idea. He finished his detox program. He then went into the rehab portion, which was supposed to be about 40 days, 45 days. Once you get into the rehab, you have limited access to a landline phone. The very first time that he called us from rehab, he sounded so good. He sounded content. He sounded happy. He really, really sounded like he was in a good place. It was so incredibly encouraging. About 2 days later, he called his sister Jenna. He told Jenna that he had actually been using heroin. When he left, we thought it was cocaine. Of course, when Jenna got done with that conversation, she called me and she told me the next time that Joey called me, I think it was that same day, honestly, I don't remember. But I said to him, Joey, I talked to Jenna. I said, you have got to work this program. Please work this program hard. I know that you are using heroin. And if you don't use this, if you don't work this program and you don't use this opportunity, you could die. Honestly, when I said that to him, I never thought that I would be living this. Never. He continued on into rehab. This next journal entry is something that he must have watched after a film that they had watched. And this is his response to the film. Very powerful. I can relate to just about everything that was said. Selling important possessions, selling everything I could find that was of value. Sitting here now, I know my disease is stronger than ever. I think about using almost constantly. I can relate to the feelings of my DOC feeling like a friend, almost destroying family ties. The most important line is where it says, I will sweep you to heaven and drop you to hell. That is an extremely true statement. Remembering times when I was out of money and couldn't get any more and feeling like absolute shit. That is a true nightmare. I hope to stay clean, but I just don't know right now. He continued on into rehab, but then he started fighting us. I want to come home. Get me a flight home. They're not doing the things they said they were going to do. We're not going to meetings. We're not doing any of the things they said we were going to do. Someone stole my sunglasses. Someone stole my sweatpants. I want to come home. Get me a flight. I said, no. I called his dad. I said, if he should call and ask for a flight home, please don't get it for him. He said, no, he wouldn't. He agreed. We figured he had a couple options. He could leave AMA against medical advice and be homeless on the streets of California, or he would stick with it. Tom and I have learned an awful lot since November 12, 2016 about addiction and how it happens. I'm going to share with you when we go into schools. We have had the privilege to be able to go into schools and share, and that's very important for us to do this. I share with them a very simplified explanation of how addiction happens. That explanation is what I'm going to share with you today. When all of us in this room, when we do things that we enjoy doing, such as hanging out with friends, playing video games, watching a good movie, eating a good meal. When we do those things, there is a substance that is released in our brain called dopamine. Dopamine is the feel-good substance. We don't have to do anything to make that happen. It just happens naturally and automatically. All we know is that we enjoy those events that I just talked about, so we want to do them again. We want to hang out with friends again. We want to go and play more video games. We want to go and eat another good meal, listen to some more great music. When someone uses heroin for the first time, there is a massive, massive, massive amount of dopamine that is released into the brain. That is what Joey was talking about when he said, sweeps you to heaven, because it is the best high ever. They can't do anything wrong. They can't say anything wrong. Life is good. So of course they want to duplicate that. They want to feel that same high. The problem is you never experience that same sweep you to heaven high again. But they're chasing after it. In the user community, that is known as chasing the dragon. So they are chasing after that initial high. A couple things happen. I talked about how that dopamine normally and naturally is released into our brains. Our brain detects that there's an artificial substance that is pushing massive amounts of dopamine into the brain, so it doesn't have to do that anymore. That is the process of the brain getting hijacked, and all the circuitry in the brain getting hijacked. Now there are very clinical explanations, but I am giving you a very simplified explanation. But our brain is filled with circuits, and that's what helps us and causes us to do the things we do. When that heroin is causing this massive, massive, massive amount of dopamine, it is hijacking the brain. That is the disease of addiction. Addiction is a disease of the brain. So that happens very quickly. So the brain doesn't have to do it anymore because it detects that there's an artificial substance that is causing that. The other thing that happens very quickly is that person is using, trying to experience that same sweep you to heaven, and they build up a tolerance. Eventually, they get to a point that if they don't use, they are going to be dope sick. How many in here have ever had the flu? And I'm talking the flu where you're sitting on the toilet because you have diarrhea, you have a trash can in front of you because you're vomiting, your head is pounding, you are hot, you are cold, you are achy. That kind of flu. Being dope sick is that kind of flu times 1,000. That is the drop you to hell that Joey was talking about. And that does not take long at all. That is when you will hear of people breaking into cars to get loose change, breaking into somebody's home to steal valuables, taking money out of a loved one's wallet. That is because they are to the point that if they don't